Hang on, folks. I think I'm getting through here, but I gotta find my place in this world. There we are. Yep. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Jeff Salzman here. Welcome to the Daily Evolver. It's Wednesday, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. And that brings me to the very sensitive subject of cultural appropriation. And what are we doing with this Irish culture here in America, at least? Somebody asked me, did I think there's St. Patrick's Day is an example of cultural appropriation? And of course it is. And cultural appropriation is the way of things throughout history, of course. And it's one of the reasons that we continue to transcend and to include different strands of culture and consciousness and transcend into higher stages. And that the idea of cultural appropriation is an idea that comes out of the green stage of consciousness, of the postmodern stage of consciousness, that says that you have to be sensitive to how you do this. And that, if you look at history, of course, cultural appropriation is the way of things, particularly in the earlier stages. And you hope that they just appropriated your culture and didn't appropriate you or your sons or daughters. And, you did your best to sort of keep an even keel there. And even when we get to modernity specializes in cultural appropriation, particularly of pre-modern cultures, well, modern cultures too, but pre-modern cultures, they'll appropriate raw materials and goods, and they don't enslave people at modernity, but they do the sweatshop thing. And so there's, this is the whole thing. And so at some point, there's a realization, and this is the postmodern realization, that if a culture hasn't really been integrated into the modern stream, you can't take their stuff. It's not okay. It's okay for the Irish, but it's not okay for groups and cultures that have been marginalized, that are not seen. And again, it gets to this thing I talk about a lot on this podcast, and that is the movement into an I-thou relationship with another culture, so that I see you not as an it, not as an I-it relationship, not as the thing that I can have and take, but as a culture that I want to integrate, that is people and a stream of historical karma that I want to integrate fully in all four quadrants. And when that's done, then appropriate away. But until that's done, we have to be not ruled by, but we have to integrate, take into account the sensitive self, the green postmodern self, that gets that people who have not entered the stream of modernity, or their culture hasn't, that they're like, you can't just come and take that. So anyway, that's why St. Patrick's Day is okay, and so many other things. We have to, again, think twice. All right, I wanted to just share a couple things here on this, culture war that we're in between Wokistan and Magistan, mainly. And that there's an understanding that I see more and more, and this would be something that we would expect as we move into integral consciousness. Integral consciousness is a new cutting edge in terms of the evolution of culture and consciousness. It's evolving out of postmodernity. And its feature is that it wants the best of all the previous stages. That's why it's called integral. It wants to integrate the best, and it wants to, differentiate the worst from all of the previous stages. And there's plenty of, good and bad in all stages, into a new integration. And there's a lot of understanding there's a lot of misunderstanding too. And I'm going to read a little piece of an essay by Damon Linker, who I often link. I think he's sort of proto-integral. He writes for The Week. And this is a couple paragraphs that he wrote on the religious aspects of politics these days, and how, as he writes it, he says, it's become an interpretive cliche to describe impassioned social movements as forms of secular religion. And that's true. It's become cliche these days to do that. And that's a good thing, because there's such a deep truth to it. And from an integral perspective, the truth is that religion in the spiritual meaning realm is real and has to be integrated. It cannot be marginalized as it has been in modernity. But I get ahead of myself here. Here's Damon Linker. He says, in this case, there's something to it, and he's talking about the woke side of the street. And he says, the very name woke is a play on the Christian Great Awakening that swept across the United States at various times in our past, revitalizing old faiths and giving birth to new ones. And as other political philosophers have noted, there are important sociological and moral connections linking the political sensibility of the woke activists ensconced within elite institutions of American culture to the old liberal Protestant mainline. And from there, all the way back to the officially sanctioned moral rectitude of Puritan New England. And again, I don't find this all that illuminating. It's religion. You can go back beyond Puritan New England, back to the power gods and the spirit gods. I mean, this is built into the human psyche. Anyway, he writes, in many respects, this successor ideology, this wokeism, isn't a political movement at all. It eschews policy positions in favor of a call to individual moral purification. It proposes to achieve this end through the denunciation of sinners who are invited to confess and give public testimony of their transgressions, with punishment taking the form of social ostracism. The purity of the accusers, meanwhile, is demonstrated by the severity of their denunciations and by their refusal to countenance mercy or forgiveness. And I think that's a good description of the religious aspects of woke. I think it misses, and as I pointed out in podcasts here, the one I think I called What's So Good About Woke, there's an upside to woke. There's a continued horizontal development of green that wants to, again, see people we saw as its, as thous, to have that windshield wiper going with all of our conditioned mind about race and class and sex, and body size and shape, and all of the things that turn people into its, the national origin, religion. We're very good at that as humans, but to bring on the social side, and I'm going to talk a good bit about that as on the podcast here. So anyway, I've often talked about the religious aspects of the climate movement. That we've sinned against God or nature. There's an apocalypse unless we repent and change our ways and get good with God. This religious impulse wants to arise because it's built in. And that's one of the things that integral, I get more and more convinced that the real work of integral is not necessarily it's certainly not just integrating Wokistan and Magistan. It's also integrating these animal spirits and even the power gods, even the sense of, being on that hero's journey. That's the really beautiful sort of form of that red religion, where we're here to have an adventure, for God's sakes. And everybody we meet is part of that adventure. And even the trees and the clouds talk to us. And, All right, so I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was, that Damon Linker was onto something. That more and more people are finding this religious, projecting this religious thing onto politics. I got an article this morning from one of my listeners, Brian, and he sent an article from The Atlantic. I assume it's pretty current. And it's written by Shadi Hamid, who is a contributing writer. And he is certainly comes from the Muslim world. I checked him out a little bit. That his books are about the Muslim. I assume he's a Muslim American, but he writes, "America without God. As religious faith has declined, ideological intensity has risen. Will the quest for secular redemption through politics doom the American idea?" And that's what Linker was talking about with woke. It wants to have a secular redemption through politics, as does MAGA, although MAGA is more, most of them are traditionally religious. Shadi Hamid writes about, since the dawn of the 20th century, political philosophers have argued that all strongly held ideologies are effectively faith-based, and that no human being can survive long without some ultimate loyalty. If that loyalty didn't derive from traditional religion, it would find expression through secular commitments, such as nationalism, socialism, or liberalism. The political theorist Samuel Goldman calls this, quote, "the law of the conservation of religion," unquote. In any given society, there is a relatively constant and finite supply of religious conviction. What varies is how and where it is expressed. And I thought that was pretty darn good. And he talks about how as the creed fragments, as United States gets more and more complex, basically, more and more voices are heard, the creed fragments. And each side seeks to exert exclusivist claims over the other. Conservatives believe they are faithful to the American ideal and that liberals are betraying it. And liberals believe with equal certitude that they are faithful to the American idea and the conservatives are betraying it. Without the common ground produced by a shared external enemy, as America had during the Cold War and briefly after September 11th, mutual antipathy grows and each side becomes less intelligible to the other. Too often, the most bitter divides are those within families. I think that's, we're seeing that continued polarization. No wonder the newly ascendant American ideologies, having to fill the vacuum where religion once was, are so divisive. They are meant to be divisive. And I like that. I think that, one of the things that I emphasize here on the Daily Evolver is the idea of being friendlier to the culture war itself, because one of the engines of evolution is this differentiation, this polarization is a movement on the path, actually. And we have to see, who are we in these polls? And we look at each other and it's like, oh my God. But then there's an integration. And, that's progress, and it ain't pretty. It's beautiful, but it ain't pretty. Here's another way that I think Integral helps this integration. He writes, and this is again, Shadi Hamid, he writes, "Whereas religion sees the promised land as being above in God's kingdom." Okay, let me say that again. Where the religious right sees the promised land as being above in God's kingdom in heaven, the utopian left sees the promised land as being ahead in the realization of a just society here on earth. So that's an interesting differentiation. I like that. The right sees the promised land as above, it's beyond this world. And the utopian left sees it as being the realization of a just society here on earth. And again, Integral says both to that, And I think this will be the impulse that will drive us to a new religion, essentially, the religion of co-creation, which is in some form or the other, the religion of evolution, the religion of I am living my life And yet I am being lived by this procreant urge that has organized this unfolding of goodness, truth, and beauty since the Big Bang. And there's consciousness all the way down into subatomic particles. And I got a great article on that this week too. Maybe I'll deal with it next week. And this idea that we as a culture are evolving. And, you know, that's the funniest thing about people's understanding of cultural evolution. We get it, you know, de facto. And people talk about where we were before Me Too, and people, you know, where we were before these racial awakenings and so forth. And we look back on our history to slavery, and, you know, there's this understanding that there's an arc of history that bends towards justice, but there's still a taboo of making it explicit. And, you know, and it's because there's a because modernity still rules in these ways, where it's not okay to accept, at least not in the modern world, you know, the scientific world, which is all about looking at exteriors, not about looking at meaning, not about looking at interiors, that there is a denial of any kind of updraft, you know, or a loving intelligence or a teleology. These are all delusions. And they have to be eradicated, as we needed to eradicate the pre-modern cruelty. And, you know, I argue, I mean, I just did a podcast called The Maladies of Modernity, about how anxiety and depression invade the world of plenty. And they are basically, you know, the diseases, if you will, of lack of meaning. And so, you know, this understanding of evolution as unfolding goodness, truth, and beauty, you know, that there is a perfection of the universe that is happening, and that our job is to perfect our little corner of it. And that's very, very meaningful. And everything we do and don't do is very, very meaningful. And that one of the ways that we do that is by consciously lighting up our entire spiral, you know, so that we reintegrate that religious impulse, shorn of its pre-modern, again, cruelties and, you know, this idea that I'm better than you are and my God's better than you are. But, you know, so we're doing both. We're building a better world and we're building a better cosmos. Shadi Hamid has a quote in his article towards the end that I pulled out here that I thought was so great. And it's from the political philosopher Samuel Kimbrell. And he says, and this is, I think, just a wonderful integral, excuse me, it's a wonderful integral transmission. And it's very simple and I love it. He says, some days are for dealing with your insurance documents, or fighting in the mud with your political opponents. But there are also days for solemnity, for fasting, for worship, for feasting, things that remind us that the world is bigger than itself. And I'm going to say that again. Some days are for dealing with your insurance documents or fighting in the mud with your political opponents. But there are also days for solemnity, or fasting, or worship, or feasting, things that remind us that the world is bigger than itself. So, yeah, I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about, you know, what is this thing that it pulls us together through the fight, this impulse to integrate that has been online since day one, since the subatomic particles. And I'm going to play an excerpt from a talk I had with Dr. Keith Witt, who I've been talking to for 7 years on this Daily Evolver. We have a series we call The Shrink and the Pundit, and we've done a couple dozen of them now, where we talk about all things integral. He's an integral psychotherapist and has been for 40 plus years, tens of thousands of sessions. He has a lot of understanding, written a lot of books on integral theory and psychotherapy. And in this talk, and I'll post this as a separate talk, but this is an excerpt from it. And it's him and me talking about this, lighting up this pre-modern part of ourselves and this warrior part of ourselves. And I'm going to go to it now. And hang on here. I'm going to go to it now. And I am going to introduce it by saying that we were talking about how Orange demystifies the world. Orange modernity demystifies the world in a good way. It also disenchants the world in a bad way. It takes all the meaning away because, meaning's in the interiors, and modernity doesn't see that. And that at Integral, we want to keep the demystification. In fact, we want to continue it, but we want to re-enchant the world. So that's where we were when this excerpt starts. And so I will share it with you now. And anything I want to say before I sign off here, because let's see here. Not really. I think, oh yes, there is one thing. I knew there was something. And that is, check out Integral Life's practice groups if you haven't. They're really doing a lot over there with people who want to be actually doing in various flavors of integral practice. I saw that there was one this morning for Enneagram 5s, and that's me. And I was tempted to do it, but I was, getting ready for this show. But I'm going to check it out post. All right. So anyway, just wanted to say that. Thank you all for tuning into the Daily Evolver. You can find all my stuff at dailyevolver.com. There's YouTube and Twitter and all that stuff too. So here's Keith and me talking about re-enchantment and, the upward draft. So I go to share screen and I go to desktop 2 and I go to share that sound. And there we go. And there's me. And here we go. Thanks, folks.
Well, and re-enchant is something that comes up every time you say it. I feel this little rush of pleasure.
Yeah.
Bringing spirit in, bringing magic back, real magic and spirit to orange and to green, and reinvigorating amber with it.
Yeah.
Guiding it. Healthy red is guided by God.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely. Healthy red is one of the areas that we most have to pay attention to, and in a way it's the first of all, the differentiation between good red and mean red has been something that I've got way deeper understanding of in the last couple of years.
Me too, through you.
Yeah, well, and through you, and and just and I realized that if we are indeed integrating the best of the first tier, the first 6 stages of human consciousness development and human cultural development, then this warrior stage is, there's so much good about it.
And it's crucial. It's necessary. This is what I wanted to talk about. We might as well just start
there. Well, let me say that, because welcome to the Daily Evolver, to another episode of The Shrink and the Pundit. And today we wanted to, we've invited people to send questions. Okay, Steve, this is from Steve. He's been listening for a long time. He always has very interesting things to say.
Yeah.
He says, the intensity of our times has to be having an uncharted effect on our individual and collective interiors. So he says, let's see, a question for you and Keith. Can you, Jeff, and you, Dr. Keith, begin to identify an amplified awareness of, in the wake of these new and heavy external events, both personally and in your work and your interface with others? Do you see more intensified happiness, depression, optimism, pessimism, clarity, just plain God consciousness? Please answer.
But by the way, the answer to that last question is yes.
Yeah.
Do I see all those things? Yeah. You and I like an integral really likes understanding the universe from an evolutionary standpoint. It no longer is something that I have to think about doing to begin my thinking about at the Big Bang. It's like everything starts at the Big Bang, and then there's the universe bias towards greater complexity that moves us forward. And as has been demonstrated endlessly in chaos theory, basically when you have opposing forces rubbing against each other, there's chaos, and there's rigidity, and they meet each other with the opposing forces. At that meeting point, there's patterns that form, and those patterns sometimes are predictable. They're self-repeating. This is how this universe self-organizes. And every once in a while, there's a new pattern that's more stable and more complex, and the whole system shifts upward. And that's evolution. That's the driver of evolution. That's in the very fabric of the universe. Yeah. Opposing forces, gravity, yep. And the Big Bang, all that stuff.
Yep.
So with people, with our species, that's an intensely social species. The rubbing together has been in our social interactions. The last couple of million years, as humans have evolved, the brain has expanded, and everybody goes, well, it's expanded because we have more. We can cook and we can concentrate calories. Okay, it's expanded because there were challenges on the velds. Yeah. But the bottom line is expanded because we've become more social. As the brain expanded, it's increased our social capacities. Most of the brain's dedicated to social interactions. And at its most fundamental level, and this is where we're getting to original sin, which is cool to me. Mm-hmm. At the most fundamental level, what we do as humans is we cooperate under a mutually accepted set of rules, which is play. Okay? You and I right now are playing. We have a mutually accepted set of complex social rules about us and about the world, and we're engaging with each other within the context of that, and it's enjoyable, it's pleasurable. Okay? And we both feel we can do this because our nervous systems are reading safety. This is the neuroception of safety. And this is going into the modern emphasis on Stephen Porges' polyvagal system, the hierarchical response that people have to the world. The first response is social engagement. Second response is fight, flight. And the third response is freeze. We prefer social engagement. Over the last...
Okay, let's pause there.
Okay.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's part of... when you talk about, what we got going for us is social, what we have going for us in a bigger sense is just this growth in general. The thing you described about these polarities and this fight and this new integration and, that's been happening since the Big Bang, and it's built in. And and the reason we're people and not just subatomic particles continuing to bounce off of each other is this thing that we prefer sociability. And so do atoms, actually. Richard Feynman talked about that.
Yes.
Physicists talk about that. He said, when you come right down to it, the best way to describe the movement of atoms is that they're playful.
And cooperative.
Yes.
I walk into a room and the bioluminescence from my body becomes coherent with the bioluminescence of a plant in the corner.
I know.
They're cooperating.
I know, me too.
So humans, so we're biased, and going back to the hierarchical response, fight, flight trumps freeze. If you freeze in terror or horror and you go start moving in fight flight, it cancels out freeze. If you're caught up in fight flight and you can engage social engagement, it cancels out fight flight. Okay, the
Hmm.
systems change internally, and for humans, the last million years, the biggest threat to humans has not been anything. Has not been anything external to the human species. It's been humans.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically, the dynamic that we've been evolving in, rapidly evolving, when we read threat from the other person, what our nervous system says is this person is no longer cooperating with us with an agreed set of rules. This person is trying to dominate us and demanding submission. That's fight. Okay.
Hmm.
And at that particular point, we go into that alarm reaction. We go into fight, fight, or freeze, usually, unless we're really complex, super complex people. And you see this in relationships, complex relationships. You see this in people with a lot of self-awareness. Leah asks about spiritual bypassing. We see people who are aware of their spiritual bypassing. Someone else is projecting to them, I'm going to dominate you. And instead of responding with fight, flight, or freeze, I respond with social engagement, inviting them to come back into social engagement.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone's going to dominate me. My said fight, flight. I need to get away from you, or I need to dominate you. Okay, those are my two choices: domination, submission, or flight.
Now,
So
didn't
that
you just say a third choice there?
freeze,
Well, no, the freeze, but also the engage or the
social engagement.
social engagement. Yes.
The social engagement system, when it's activated, interiorly cancels out fight, flight, or freeze.
Okay. So that's what we prefer.
We prefer that.
Yes.
Humans prefer it. And there's some evidence, and I mentioned this before, that the humans self-domesticated between 50 and 70,000 years ago when there was this proliferation of tribes in Africa, and they were rubbing up against each other. And the people who cooperate intertribally had an advantage. And so during that 20,000 years, there were changes, not just in terms of people's social capacities, but in the genome that caused humans to be.
Hey, gang, this is Jeff. I think I'm just going to play this out. I have nothing else for the live show. So there's another 38 minutes if you're so inclined. Otherwise, again, I'll have it posted here in a few days. Thanks again. I'm going to go back to Keith.
Their faces got flatter, their brains got bigger in a particular sense, the prefrontal cortex, and the people that were more social, more cooperative had an advantage. We prefer play, which is cooperation under an agreed upon set of rules.
Yeah. Then why do we fight so much? Because that doesn't work, right? Or it doesn't always work.
Well, we fight because when our nervous system reads threat and doesn't believe that cooperation is possible, we go, okay, it's dominant submission.
Okay.
I got two choices.
I get it. I do that all the time.
Yeah. Well, and also you can see one of the things that has arisen out of the human social experiment, so to speak, that is now dominating this planet and probably will spread off this planet to other stars. One of the things that is dominating that whole flow is that if you can convince a group of people that cooperation is not possible with another group of people, then you can sell them on, we have to go dominate them.
Right.
We do not have to cooperate with them under an agreed upon set of rules.
Right.
Because we can't. Because
Right.
you can't cooperate with those people. You can't talk to those people.
Right.
You can't. The whole.
Well, we could even argue that there's truth to that. In that, when people are coming from two different worldviews, and, let's look at our current culture. We have people coming from a progressive postmodern worldview and from a traditional worldview. Then the poor moderns are stuck in the middle. But the traditionalists and postmodernists, they're right about that. They really actually can't communicate with each other. At least we haven't, great swaths of us can't.
That's right. Well, and not only that, but starting in the 80s and 90s, in the short run, what happened is there was a play between conservatives, progressives, where they would cooperate. We have a set of rules, and we will work together, and we'll move things forward. We'll make things happen.
Yeah.
Okay? We can play under certain circumstances. But then one side realized, this was the super far right, I can game the system. I can freeze the system and make nothing happen. And if I can do that, I can have power over the system. And now that play in the middle, where we can cooperate and make things happen, that's stopped. At that particular point, all kinds of things started happening interiorly in the United States, happened between people, and also happened internationally. Right now, look at China, okay? China is so much more agile and effective at playing with the world than the United States. Why? The United States does not have a party freezing it from doing initiatives. China does not have a party freezing it from doing initiatives. China goes into Latin America and says, look, how about I build a port here? How about I build a road here? You know, you give us resources and opportunities, and we'll do trade, and we'll play with you in these environments. China's actually doing that with its own people. They've raised 800,000 people to the middle class. Why? They don't have a party stopping them from raising people to the middle class. And part of what they're saying is, we're demonstrating to you that maybe your democratic ideals aren't really as effective in terms of taking care of people and making things happen. And right now, that's true, okay? Because the United States, who can't do anything because the system is frozen by one group that says I can have power as long as I freeze the system, can't compete with a more agile superpower that can actually do things.
Yeah. All right. I mean, we could get back to sort of our different stories about that. I mean, I could argue that when we go back to particularly the United States, that if we talk about, I just think that what you're talking about is evolutionarily potent.
Yes.
We had a sort of a fused center modern consciousness after the war. I mean, this is that, stages of development where, after a cataclysm, there tend to be people get together and then they differentiate. Mm-hmm. And we differentiated. And I wouldn't say that the right differentiated first if you consider the 60s.
Oh, that's a good point.
The whole
good
left,
point.
The whole progressive worldview came online. It literally didn't exist in the cosmos as far as we know.
And I want to point out, you're just demonstrating now the thing that Leah said about spiritual bypassing, okay? This is me spiritual bypassing. This is me denying the excesses of the left because I'm pissed off at the right, okay?
I know, yeah.
And there it is.
Plenty to be pissed off about. But yeah, I mean, it's evolutionarily potent that it came online. I mean, we just can't stay with Walter Cronkite forever.
That guy, though.
I liked him too, but whatever. So we have this culture war, and that's where we're back to this idea of constraints, being constrained, preferring play, not getting each other. Seeing each other as enemies because we really don't even have the ability to talk. I mean, Integral does. Integral starts to have the ability to talk to both, see both, and really present an integration of the best of the warring parties. But
Reich, the guy, he was I think the Treasury Secretary under Obama. He's a professor at Berkeley.
Yeah, Robert Reich
just wrote a book. And he says that essentially right now, the United States is a loose oligarchy, in that what you have is a lot of corporations that are basically extracting from the group, from the collective, and being able to sell a narrative to the collective that the people that they're wanting to change our extracting system are actually the people that are extracting from you. And they're the people that you have to push against and you have to vote against and so on. And that's been very effective and is continuing to be effective. And so now we have all these polls that say 70 or 80% of Americans want this change and that change and this cooperation, that cooperation, and it doesn't happen. Now, part of the
Well, again, I would say that if you look at the last year, Keith, any reasonable definition of how fast we could move left.
oh, that's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and it's COVID. I mean, COVID fast forwarded our culture in 10 years in 1 year.
It
I mean,
did.
in so many ways. And
it
this is
still
one
is.
of them. Yeah. I mean, we know that green economics is going to be more egalitarian. It's the moral development that we're growing into, that's going to happen. And also that I guess this is part of it, but that the baseline of a reasonable, decent lifestyle is raised.
Yes. Yes.
So that people have a participation in the system, and we can see where, the system as it is throwing off money and eddies and, ways that are stagnant, and that's all. We're waking up to that. But I think this last year has been, and also culturally with Black Lives Matter, women. Oh my God,
Me
last,
too.
all of it, is even meat. McDonald's is coming out with plant burger, McPlant or something.
Or regenerative farming being
the soil, climate.
Well, and also going back to the second question, my opinions and attitudes and a way of dealing with the world has changed more in the last couple of years that I've observed it, which is very, very difficult to observe change in your own consciousness because it happens so slowly.
Yeah.
For instance, back in the 80s, 70s, remember the inflation that happened? Okay. Yeah. Well, that's what happened when there was just too much green controlling the economy.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, this current thing has been really good for the macro economy, for Wall Street and so on. But coming back to the original premise about all this stuff, we prefer to play, and it's kind of pushing to what are the action steps around this? Well, with individuals and with couples, which is where the rubber meets the road with me, because I do psychotherapy all day long, 4 days a week. Is couples will go into this is how we've always played. This is how babies play peekaboo. Okay, here's how baby plays peekaboo. Mom goes like this. Baby feels a little bit alarmed because mom's not around. Oh no! Starts going into a little bit of neuroception of safety, and mom goes, "Oh, here I am." Baby goes, "Oh, now I feel better." Oh, peekaboo. Okay, this is how play. This is how play happens at every level. Get a little threatened, and then we're back to social engagement. Little threatened. Back to social engagement.
Neat.
This is how contracts are. Two big companies are doing some big deal with each other. Oh, I'm going to do this. Well, I'm going to do this. They have agreed upon set of rules, international rules, whatever. And, they're here. Okay, now we've done it. Okay, we've done our deal. Okay, we've successfully played and made something happen. Okay, so even fighting, a couple of football players will just go kick the shit out of each other, but they know in the back of their mind, neither one of us knows we can pull out a knife and stick it into the other guy, because there's an agreed upon set of rules that says we can kick the shit out of each other, but we can't get a knife and stick it in. So that provides it's play, even though it looks violent and aggressive, and our violent this is a human superpower. When our violent instincts are channeled into play, we are regulating out of domination submission into cooperation, which is what you do in every social dilemma. I do it with couples. God, about 30% of my practice is couples. For almost in every hour of a couple that I work with, I probably help them regulate from domination submission into cooperation. I'd say on an average of 20 times in an hour.
Wow.
And that's an average.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 60 times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you've got this intensified crucible of, them being there and you're, doing your thing. Yeah. Goddamn right.
And right now, I think that one of the greatest things in the United States for moving things forward, besides all this upset, which requires novelty, is people getting involved on the local level with their neighbors and with their communities to make things happen.
Yeah.
I want to fix the road. I want to fix the bridge. I want to take care of our homeless problem. What are we going to do about State Street? There's a lot of empty stuff. Okay. And so on those levels, there isn't as much of a freeze in the process, in my experience. There's a lot more room for cooperation, and I suspect that that's probably going to be the future. That out of those collaborative engagements, people are going to start electing representatives that say we're going to make something happen.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
eventually even saying I will vote against party if I feel it's in the best interest of the principles that people share. And that's going back to, we prefer play, but if we believe that the choice is domination submission, we're going to push for domination.
Yeah.
So
Well,
as long as
you mentioned in your notes about Leah's question, you wrote some notes to me, that that when, and I thought about this in terms of my own relationships with my friends. When one of my friends is coming on too strong, or there's a fight energy going on, then or I have that with them, that is a call to a constraint.
Yes.
So I like that, because then I know what's going on here. We're looking at sort of the basic mechanisms of,
Yes.
the
primal
fuel.
causes.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So so I'm calling for a constraint, and so that then creates a boundary where a new level of play can happen.
Or if it's two red power gods.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan never got defeated. But I don't know, somebody else. I don't know, France and England in the 100 Years War. Okay, if it's two power gods, it's just okay. Either you submit, or I'm going to get you to submit, or I'm going to get you to submit. But if one of the people is not at red or amber submission, they're at orange. I want to do business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Or green. I want everybody, or even teal.
Mm-hmm.
At that particular level, to the person that is in the more complex consciousness, they go, okay, so you're dominate or submit. Nazi Germany, North Korea currently. Okay. As a collective person, Jung called this getting inflated. The collective goes, okay, now I have to respond and constrain you from dominating everything. And I'm going to keep doing that until you start playing, until you cooperate. So Germany and Japan, they were going to expand, and they were going to either take over the world or they were going to be constrained. The world responded to the collective, we're going to constrain you. Then they said, the world that was not red power gods, now play with us. And they both said, okay, we'll play well. In fact, we'll play better than and now two signature.
I mean, talk about evolution.
Talk about evolution.
Yeah.
And you can freeze it for a while, like North Korea is doing now, or Japan did during the shogunate. I mean, it's astounding to me that in the 16th century, Japan was unified under a dictator, and then he began to organize the social structures, just like North Korea, really, to keep the rest of the world out and freeze his culture in place. And it stayed frozen in place until Persians showed up in the 20th.
No, Keith, I'm watching I'm such an old man. I'm watching all these history documentaries about the barbarians and the Rome and the Egypt and the tribes and all this stuff, and the Huns and the Genghis Khan and Attila, and you're right. The pattern is, you could have several hundred years of peace and prosperity if the certain sweet spot is hit. And there's not a lot of competition, and you find yourself in a nice place. That can go on for several hundred years. The human impulse to continue to grow and mess with things finally wins out, or somebody comes over the horizon, or you see a city gleaming on the hill that you want, and that happens. And then there's ruthless. I mean, you talk about, the ruthless brutality of human history is you can't even begin to wrap your head around. So, but the basic idea would be that these two armies, or these two warlords, the sort of the deal would be, okay, we're going to fight to the death, and the victor will reign in peace. Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. And if you talk about the basic mechanisms of human culture. That's it writ large.
And you can understand the short-term attraction. Genghis Khan had the largest, most peaceful empire that had ever been known.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that he did is he got rid of corruption. In other words, if you broke one of his laws, he killed you.
Yeah.
Right now, China's government is very popular to the Chinese people because, from the very beginning has been working against corruption. And you talk to people in the countryside and they say, we're no longer getting ripped off by the bullies and stuff because the government won't let them. So what that does is essentially give them human rights. I have the right to go down the road without some guy, getting some illegal toll. Okay.
Yeah,
now, in the short run, that could keep people happy, but in the long run, people are going to want more and more rights, which creates tension.
Yep.
Between we want to keep it the way it is, and then out of that will come some kind of constraint, and then will come new play.
Yeah.
That's evolution.
Well, in China is a very interesting case in that the Uyghurs and the police state that still exists.
Exists even better, even more effectively than it.
In some ways more benignly in a way. I mean, to talk about the Uyghur concentration camps in any way like the Nazi concentration camps, you're missing the point. There's even an evolution of concentration camps. I mean, that's, you feel, I could feel a revulsion at even pointing that out, but it's true. Yeah. And actually what the Communist Party has to do in China is, and they've been doing it, is bring 1.3 billion people into modernity. And that ain't easy. And part of what they have to do, and she's doing it, and I know there's a lot of liberals who recoil at that, is, well, there's a couple things. One is this social equity system, where people are rewarded for not jaywalking, and there's a score kept for your entire life. And it does have, of course, it is a surveillance state in a certain way, but it's tuned benignly and humanely in a way that supports good behavior.
Yeah.
I mean, we could see the rights and freedoms have grown enormously since the 60s and the Cultural Revolution. I mean,
that's right.
Things like that, and even Tiananmen. But they're doing it their way, and I don't want to understate the horrors of the Uyghur camps. We don't want to be naive about that. And there's stories of forced labor and forced sterilization and brutality and so forth. That having an integral consciousness, we want to see it all. And also see the trends, also see the larger context of the unfolding of truth.
California has forced labor. Convicts can be used as forced labor. It's in the California Constitution, and now there is a law in California to stop forced labor in prisons.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the evolutionary force, and now this brings us to the second question. So how have you changed?
Yeah.
I never thought that I would be looking appreciatively at China giving more rights to farmers to be able to make more money and not be ripped off by the local sheriff. I didn't think that I would have the understanding that I have, largely from our conversations. I think of there's a basic yearning in both political structures to make good things happen that's being blocked by power dynamics and by money dynamics and by the momentum of history. There's also an evolutionary force happening where something different is going to arise, and this is the thing. I'm open. If China wants to show the world that they can take better care of people and reduce climate change and create more collaboration and give human rights to people in a one-party system, I don't want to live in that system, but I'm much more interested in how that system evolves than I was before.
Yeah. No,
it's changed.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's and that would be roughly on the trends that we've identified all along in this conversation is just a greater complexity of mind.
Yeah.
The ability to see, for years we were raised, there's China, this thing, this big two-dimensional thing. And now over time, we see the communists and we see the this, and then we see the growth, and we see the gleaming cities, and we see the smog, and we see the Uyghurs, and we see the Hong Kong. And, it's my thing. Evolution is beautiful. We can see the trends towards greater freedom, liberty, decency for sure. I mean, out of poverty, 1 billion people, amazing, but it ain't pretty.
Yeah.
Beautiful, but not pretty. And that, I guess, if there's anything for me that would characterize what I've learned, well, I've learned that to be, to take a different attitude towards the people I thought were my enemies.
Well, in terms of, you've been doing the Daily Evolver for 10 years. You and I have known each other much longer than that. We've been doing this. This is what I observe in you. What I observe in you is you always look for the larger understanding. If you get pissed off or you get a doctrinaire or you get in a rigid position, your first unconscious response is to look for a larger understanding. It doesn't require any effort. Okay, that's your consciousness being changed. And until you have a larger understanding, you're not real confident about what you're saying. And I'm getting to, I will get in doctrinaire positions every once in a while, but I'm getting more suspicious of it. Okay. For me, it's, if I don't feel like I have compassionate understanding, I'm suspicious of where I'm coming from. Certainly that plays out on the, I'm seeing this with individuals and couples that I work with, because on an interior level, when dealing with our different parts of ourselves, the play-fight dynamic is the same dynamic. Essentially, if I'm fighting with myself on an interior level, I have an internalized conflict. Internalized conflict is how Freud defined neurosis.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can get different parts of myself collaborating with an agreed upon set of rules to create more novelty, I'm now having interior play instead of interior conflict. What does that do? That radically amplifies the evolution of my consciousness.
Yeah.
And when you're doing therapy, you're actually looking individually and interpersonally both from the upper left and the lower left. You're looking for those conflicts, because in the confusion and distress and the rigidity of those conflicts, there are transformational opportunities. So you bring attention to bear there until those parts start cooperating.
Oh my God. It's like massaging a knot in your muscle.
Exactly.
I mean, you do a tender and you try this side and that side, and you don't push too hard, but you find it yielding.
Yes.
And then you do it some more, and then it gives way, and there's this wonderful rush of blood into that area that was so constricted and life. And it's something like that.
Yes.
And you put it so beautifully, and thank you for, sort of defining some of these mechanisms that come into play. Because I will correct one thing you said. My reflexive position is not for the larger understanding. If we could go back. Well, thank you. But my reflective position is fear and loathing. And sometimes it's pretty stubborn, I want to say. I mean, I have a couple of friends that I have really sort of, we're hitting Rock of Gibraltar versus Rock of Gibraltar.
My goodness.
Big, heavy tectonic conflicts, not in bad ways. Actually, to the degree that you're right, is that I have a certain playful attitude about it. But I will say this, and this is new, that I do see that is a red flag for me, or a green flag maybe.
Yeah, there you go.
To go deeper in this direction that you're talking about, that there is a new level of play beyond that I can go for, and I actually have done it in a couple cases. And inevitably, it's about
Well, give an example. I mean, you don't have to
Yeah, okay.
violate somebody's privacy, but what's an example where you've gone beyond it, Jeff?
Oh, there's several, but one is here's the thing. I talk to a group of people regularly, and there's one person who is just particularly diametrically opposed to a lot of what I have to say, but they're integral, and they understand the integral model inside and out, and that drives me crazy because how could they understand it and not agree with me?
Right, right.
But here's what I have laid aside. They're not going to agree with me, and they don't have to agree with me. And it's more interesting for all of us if we don't, and he does the same thing back, where he tries to colonize me, so it's
I know
the
who you're
domination.
talking about. I can see this.
It's the domination submission, both ways. And for me, and I think for him too, it's just almost like that massage. I mean, even though we went in there with, guns a-blazing, over time, we've just become a little more interested in the other. And actually, I think we've surrendered. We give up. I mean, I know that I'm not going to win him over. So for the larger community, for this larger group that we're often arguing in front of, I realize that the way forward is to present my position. And I know I'm not going to win him over, but I may, to the degree that it wins people over, it wins the day. That's evolution working with me here.
Well, it sounds like play
and
to me.
The degree that it doesn't, and he gets to put his point out, and they agree. And sometimes I think, why are you agreeing with him?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, he's wrong.
I'm right. Wrong.
But it's more playful, Keith.
It's play.
That damn word. If that isn't the key to the city, play, I don't know what is.
That's what it was so exciting about me. It came to me when I was listening to a talk by Stephen Porges about the polyvagal system. And the guy says, well, what's happening when you're not engaged in fight flight? He said, play. And I thought, okay. And all of a sudden, like a flood of other research, for instance, fear and loathing. Fear and loathing is you having judgments. Okay. Now, my nervous system judges, and it doesn't.
And me having fear. I mean, there's somebody who thinks, they're gonna. I mean, if my way of thinking isn't the correct one, then I'm in danger.
You are, yes, and you perceive danger, and you respond to it with disapproval. Okay. Yeah. Now, there's Jonathan Haidt wrote a book on basic moral principles. He thinks that there's 6 basic moral foundations that are all solutions to evolutionary problems. Freedom versus oppression, fairness versus unfairness, loyalty versus betrayal. All of these things are evolutionary problems that were solved by developing a drive, an instinct to be moral in those particular areas. So when you feel fear and loathing, these are both forms of judgment, what these are subtle forms of social constraint, where my disapproval of you is put over there as a constraining influence on my opinion that you're engaging in some kind of behavior that is immoral or impractical or something, and you receiving it in a benign fashion is part of the game. Maybe you be influenced, maybe you're not being influenced, but this is how we try to influence each other. Now, if I can still connect with you in love, but still disapprove of stuff that you're saying, this is basically at that moment, I'm at a teal altitude.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. Well, at teal altitude, evolution is particularly accelerated. And where does teal go when it evolves?
Yeah.
It goes to this conversation. It goes to turquoise. It goes to joining with like-minded people to try to serve the greater good.
Yeah. And what I've realized about these teal and turquoise levels is they're significantly more complex than orange and green. Yeah. And part of that complexity manifests in that people believe all kinds of shit.
That's true.
I mean, I have friends, the smartest people in the world, and this one believes Bush brought down the trade tower, and this one talks to aliens, and this one, they're all of this one loves Trump. I mean, they have an integral sensibility, and we're just going to have to live with it and become curious about it instead of critical about it in a way that's playful, because there's a lot of juice there.
The hardest part of this, way back, remember when we had the Integral Conference, the one where everybody was honoring Ken? We did it in Denver. And you went on stage and talked about the myth of the infinite cornucopia by Wilasek.
Yes.
I kept forgetting.
I know. The Polish. Yes, exactly.
Polish guy, okay.
Yeah.
Well, the infinite cornucopia.
Polish philosopher.
Philosopher.
And the law of the infinite cornucopia.
Yeah. The law of infinite cornucopia is that whatever position you have, there is some data to support it.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, it's so hard for me. I listen to a lot of cutting edge health practitioners. I listen to a lot of cutting edge psychotherapy practitioners. And so you can get biochemical, molecular, and epidemiological support for, say, being a carnivore, not eating plants. You can get support for the vaccines being bad for you, okay?
Yes.
Or the vaccines saving your life.
Yeah.
You can get support for taking high doses of certain vitamins, and then you can get support for that's bad for your body, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, these are well-meaning, intelligent, educated, cutting-edge people that have their thing that they're excited about.
Yep.
And I listen to that, and there's a part of me that goes, oh my God.
Yeah.
So should I take vitamin C?
Yeah.
Should I not?
And should I take a bottle a day, or should I take one capsule? And what kind of fat do I eat with it? And you can go nuts with this stuff.
And then what do they all agree on? And then when you find what people agree on, like for instance, we all agree that love and cooperation is better interpersonally. Happy couples make are good friends, and they prioritize their lover relationship. And when there's conflict, they look for a way that they can both get through it. Okay, everybody can see that and agree with that. Everybody can look at the data on regenerative farming and on grazing. We can see how that creates more soil and sequesters more carbon, and is one of the obvious solutions to climate change. There's certain kind of through lines that are just
food. I mean, it's
food.
Real, and that it's fresh, and that it's varied,
organic,
and that it has color to it, and that
there's no Roundup on it.
Yeah, there's some things that I just, when I read all of this diet stuff, I just go back to, let me just eat what's good.
Yeah, and
then a bag of Oreos occasionally.
Oh, once in a while. So the infinite cornucopia gets me confused, but on the other hand, it's just like you said. We
want to go back to Walter Cronkite?
No, I don't. And also, one of the things that's changed more is I'm much more tolerant of being confused.
Yeah, totally.
Okay? I used to be embarrassed about being confused, so I'd have to kind of create some certainty. I'm not as embarrassed being confused anymore. It's like, I don't know.
It's a fertile field, confusion. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's good.
Well, on that note,
yes.
On the note of honoring.
Now that we've got everybody positively confused.
We got everybody positively confused. Let's declare victory. We will declare victory. We will declare coherence and evolution on our conversation.
That's right. Yeah, we got it all figured out again. All right, my friend. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Keith Witt. Anything new that people need to know about?
Anything new that people need to know about?
Your books or your courses or?
Nothing new. Okay. I'm in a period of deep study right now. There's several areas that have captured my imagination. This is one of them. Mm-hmm. The play fight. Another one was Emily Nagoski's new book, Come As You Are, on female sexuality. It's
That's great. What a great title.
I know, it's a great title, and Jonathan Haidt's book on the moral foundations. I, I'm I'm finding those ideas very useful in my psychotherapy.
Yeah. Ah,
Um,
yeah. Fantastic. And of course, people can find your stuff at drkeithwitt.com.
drkeithwitt.com. You can find my books. You can find my classes. You can find my lectures. You can find many shrinking pundits
Yes.
with me and my friend with me and my friend Jeff Salzman over the last 7 years.
Right on. Yeah. And you can find my stuff at dailyevolver.com. And yeah, so thanks so much.
Dailyevolver.com is a touchstone for the integral world.
Yeah. Well,
And it's a guy. It's a lot. The Daily Evolver is a map of the integral awakening. And it's an important one. I was just reading the Integral Spirituality recently and just falling in love again, like, and all it
Ken Wilber's book.
Yeah. I mean, you open up one, you and I have talked about this. Any random page of any of his books, you read that and you go, oh my God, oh my God. But there's something about the Daily Evolver and the people that you talk to on Daily Evolver that humanizes and concretizes the integral message. And it's just such an important contribution. So I just want to honor 10 years of Daily Evolver.
Thank you, Dr. Keith. Well, may it be so, and more to come. So. Yes. And so we'll see you next time.